One. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're tuning us in. Welcome once again to our daily, our show here, the B&B Hockey Talk. I'm Aaron Bloxel with Matthew Balzer. As today we continue our 31 teams in 31 days with the Colorado Avalanche. But before we jump into potential lines and go through some of their roster, there's a couple minor sightings overnight and this morning. So Matthew's going to bring us through that, and then he's going to jump into some potential forward lines with the Colorado Avalanche. Matthew, take it away.
All right, so just two signings, nothing too major, but the Vegas Golden Knights locked up Thomas Nosek to a 1-year extension, just a little under $1 million. He was a big part of their fourth line this year, and had 4 goals and 6 points in 17 playoff games in their playoff run. It was pretty consistent on that fourth line. And the Sharks locked up Chris Tierney to a 2-year extension, just a little under $3 million. He had 17 goals, 40 points with them last year, and was and had a good step forward with when Joe Thornton got hurt. He was able to move up and continue to produce. All right, to get into the Colorado Avalanche, let's just say this top line, we brought up the Boston top line. Well, this one can rival it with Gabriel Landeskog, Nathan MacKinnon, and Mikko Rantanen, who just absolutely, well, with MacKinnon, who I think should have won the Hart Trophy this year over Taylor Hall. But these guys made, well, huge bounce back years and just absolutely ripped up NHL. I'll just read off what the point totals that these guys had last year. Landeskog only had 33 points last year and was in trade rumors that they'd move him, and he improved to 25 goals and 62 points from last year. MacKinnon only had 16 goals and 53 points last year, and he had 97 points and 39 goals this year. And Rantanen only had 20 goals and 38 points last year, and he had 29 goals and 84 points this year. So just a huge step forward from just being like, where are these guys? It's like, are they going to take that extra step with Landeskog? Is he going to bounce back? And man, they absolutely ripped it up. With their next 9 forwards, players can be moved around as follows, but I'll just write or say what I have written down. My second line, I have Alex Kerfoot, Carl Soderberg, and Matt Nieto. Kerfoot had a great rookie season. He had 19 goals and 43 points last year. The one thing I'll mention with him is that he did have 19 goals, but he only had 81 shots on goal. So his shooting percentage was super high. So it will be interesting to see if he can keep that pace up. And Soderberg, another guy with a big bounce back here, only had 14 points in 80 games last year. And he bounced back with 37 points this year. And Nieto was a good waiver pickup from the Sharks, and he was able to fit in on a checking role with that line. The third line I have is Sven Andrighetto, Tyson Jost, and Matt Calvert. Calvert, they signed over from the Columbus Blue Jackets this offseason, and will be a good bottom 6 for it. Andrighetto, smallish, but offensive winger, will be good. And Tyson Jost, as remember from Team Canada a few years ago at the World Juniors, was probably one of their best players all around. And he's a big part of their number 1 unit power play from last year. And the fourth line I have is Colin Wilson, Vladislav Kamenev, who they got in the Matt Duchene, Kyle Turris deal, and JT Compher as the fourth line. Wilson battled through injuries last year. He can be a guy that can move up in the lineup because he has scored 20 goals in the past. So he's a guy that could move up in the lineup. And then as the extra forwards, I have Gabriel Bork and Dominic Toninato, who can move in onto that fourth line.
Excellent. Yeah, they have unbelievable youth in this team, especially that forward roster. One stat that stood out to me is going into next season, with those players. They're going to have the third youngest forward group in the NHL. And saying that, they have some more young guys that still may step up. I'm going to pause for a sec because my connection said was a little shaky. So hopefully today it goes without a hitch. But yeah, definitely a young forward group. I mean, their top line, Landeskog, McKinnon, and Rantanen, all very young players. Tyson Yost, Comfer, those guys bring a lot of youth, and even Kemenev that you talked about, we'll touch on him in our prospects list. So let's get into the defense a little bit. Again, they have just some unbelievable youth on their back end as well. They're a little bit more seasoned, though. They have a pretty strong 8, including some up-and-coming prospects that will be pushing those 8. So let's get into it. Patrick Nemeth and Tyson Barrie. I know Tyson Barrie took a huge jump this year, really helped them out on the power play a lot. The second line that I've got written down is Zadorov and Eric Johnson, who's definitely a pillar on the defense. He's battled a lot of the top centers across the league for many years and will help defensively there. And then they've got Sam Girard, who they got in the Duchesne and Turris trade out of Nashville, one of those other defensemen. I know we talked about that last night, where Nashville continues to draft and produce defensemen. Girard's going to be one of those guys. I think he's going to make a really big step this year. And, of course, free agent Ian Cole that they signed out of Columbus. That rounds out our top 6. But, of course, they got some veterans as their 7th and 8th guys in Mark Barberio and Anton Lindholm. And, for most teams typically will go through 8, 9, 10 defensemen in a season. So they definitely got some depth there. And I believe when we were comparing notes before the show started, you had the exact same 8 guys. It's pretty funny. But before you comment on it, I know David Warsofsky and Mark Alt also played a handful of games for Colorado last year to fill in. I've got them listed as the 9th and 10th guys. Both more on the veteran side. They're not youthful from their farm team, the San Antonio Rampage, but definitely experienced enough to step in as needed. They're still under contract, and I know if they run into some injuries that they'll have some great depth there. So why don't you touch on the defense, what you got on your notes, and then we'll get you to jump into the goaltending.
Yeah, I'll give huge props to Joe Stakic and getting this defense core, because basically all the guys except for Barrie have been through either free agency or trades. Like Nemeth, they got from Dallas, Zadorov, Buffalo, Johnson, St. Louis, Girard, Nashville, and then signing Cole out of Columbus. And all relatively really young. Johnson being injured at the end of the year really hurt when they went into the playoffs last year, or this past year against Nashville. Really hurt because I think basically they had like their top 4 and then their 5th and 6th defensemen barely played. So adding more depth to that defense will really help. And Tyson Barrie, the guy that Canucks may have been able to get a trade for if they wanted to include Ben Hutton back in the day, but Benny didn't want to do that for some reason. But yeah, Barry's one of those elite offensive defensemen, and he should be pushing around 60 points, I think, this year. And getting into the goaltenders, talk about the former Washington Capital goalies that Colorado continues to use. Semyon Varlamov, who had a great bounce back year from last year, getting 24 wins in 51 games and getting back up to a .920 save percentage. Had a really good season, even though he got hurt at the end of the last year, which also hurt Colorado in the playoffs, having to go with Bernier and Andrew Hammond. And then they brought in a trade from with Washington, Philip Grubauer, who is potentially could be a number 1 goalie this year and will push Varlamov for his starts. He had 15 wins, .923 save percentage last year with Washington, and not to make a small point or whatever, but he was a huge part of getting Washington into the playoffs, with Holtby really struggling through actually out most of the season. That Trotz actually went with him for some long stretches here and there. just because Grubauer was outplaying Holtby, and he even started the playoffs over Holtby going in there. And then as a third stringer, they signed over from the KHL Pavel Francouz. If you guys followed the Olympics and the World Championships for the Czech Republic, he was the Czech goalie in net, and he put up some really gaudy numbers in the KHL this past year. In 35 games, he had a .946 save percentage and a 1.80 goals against average. But his record was only 15-11-5, as I brought up earlier before the show started when we were talking, which is pretty crazy to have numbers like that and just about be like at a 500 record. So he'll be that third stringer in the American League and could potentially get some starts if Varlamov gets injured.
I definitely like their 1-2 punch with Varlamov and Grubauer. I really do think Grubauer is going to push for that number one goaltending spot, just like he did in Washington last year. Definitely a goalie on the rise. And, yeah, those are pretty incredible stats by that guy that they just signed from the KHL there. We definitely had a laugh on that before the show started. So I think they're solidified. It's definitely a big step over the goaltending that they had last year. You know, they decided not to sign Jonathan Bernier. They decided to let go of the cheeseburglar, right? Andrew Hamblin, the hamburger, right? I always want to call him the cheeseburglar. Nothing like seeing Curtis Lazar picking up the burger off the ice, right? When they're in Ottawa. But they let those guys go. They let a few other UFAs go. Not a lot of major ones, but Duncan Siemens was a high prospect of theirs that they decided to not re-sign this year. And that kind of leads us into their prospects. So why don't you take us in, because they do have a couple of absolute guys that we think are going to make a huge impact in this league. Maybe not potentially this year, but in the years to come. So why don't you take us away on that?
All right, so I'll bring up the big two right off the bat. First off, you got Cale Makar, who they drafted, I believe, 4th overall a couple of years ago. He was a star on Canada's World Junior team offensively. It was sometimes a bit frustrating when the coach wouldn't play him. When he got the puck, he was fun to watch. And talk about Tyson Barrie, I think he could be another guy along that lines. And the other guy who I thought was Canada's best defenseman, maybe one of the best defensemen at the World Junior tournament this past year, Connor Timmins, had 41 points in 36 games in the OHL, and had another 18 points in 23 games in the playoffs. This guy was the best two-way defenseman in the as I said, in the World Junior tournament. And talk about a guy like Eric Johnson or something like that, could potentially end up being like a 30, 40-point guy maybe into the years to come. So it'll be interesting to see those two guys, how they develop. I think Makar will be back in college this year, taking a bit of a longer time to develop. And a third guy I'll throw out there, their first rounder from this year's draft, Martin Kaut, who played in the Czech Republic. I believe he dealt with heart problems this year, but he's a guy that they're pretty high on up front.
Well, I know Cale Makar, Canuck fans know, went just before we drafted the Elias Pettersson. And the neat thing about that is I know Canuck fans are always in a rush for prospects to jump into the league. But you see guys like Cale Makar that are taking an extra year. And there's players, a lot of teams are doing that. And, Canuck fans just need to have patience as as they develop their prospects like other teams do. A few other prospects I have on the list. They got a guy named Shane Bowers in that Turris and Duchesne trade out of Ottawa. He was a first-round pick as well in 2017. Played for Boston University last year. Had 32 points in 40 games. And he's highly touted in Colorado as somebody that's going to push for a forward spot potentially this year, but I'd say probably another year away. We already talked about Vladislav Kamenev, and he had a major injury last year. He only ended up playing 17 games for the San Antonio Rampage. and I believe I can't remember the other AHL team, but it was split between the two before he was traded.
Might have been Milwaukee.
Milwaukee, yes. So he played 17 games between Milwaukee and San Antonio, and then he only got in 3 games in Colorado before he had a major injury. I think he broke his arm, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
it's pretty severe. And then J.C. Bowden is another centerman that they're coveting, but for some reason, I think it was through injury as well. Didn't get into a whole lot of games last year. Split time between the AHL and their East Coast League team. So he is set to come back this year, make an impact probably in the AHL, and then make his way up on the NHL team. So other prospects, do you have other guys there you want to touch on as well?
Not really. I think one other minor signing that they did, Ryan Graves, who I believe they got in a trade with the Rangers. I think that might have been for Chris Biggrass, who was a defensive prospect for them. They traded for him. He's more of a defensive defenseman. He had the 17 points in 78 games in the American League last year. But he's another defensive prospect that I throw out there. And to go back to Shane Bowers, I think it will be interesting with being an Ottawa former first rounder, and then with Ottawa drafting Brady Tkachuk. Bowers and Tkachuk were actually teammates in Boston this past season. So it'll actually be interesting to see who develops into the better player there. Because some guys have been like really high on Tkachuk, and other guys are just like red flags and stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how which player develops better.
Another thing, we touched on their youth and these prospects that they have, how they're the third youngest team right now with the forward group that they currently have. Only one player in their current forward group is over 30 years old, and that's Carl Soderberg. He's going to turn 33 in the next couple of months. So they are super young. And the other thing to remember is they do have the Ottawa Senators first-round draft pick next year. And if Ottawa is going to be as bad as everybody thinks they are, that could potentially be Mr. Jack Hughes if they win the draft lottery. So definitely they're going to get another good piece next season. They finished last year, last day of the NHL. They got into the playoffs with 95 points, just 1 point ahead of St. Louis. That was 4th in their division and obviously 8th in the conference. Where do you see them fitting in this year? I have them sliding a little bit. I don't think the Landeskog, McKinnon, and Rantanen line can keep up the incredible pace that they were on last year. Like, I agree, McKinnon should have been the Hart Trophy winner. Whenever we saw them in Vancouver, that line was just unbelievable. But I see them sliding a little bit back down to about 90 points, which would see them potentially miss the playoffs this year. Where do you see them going?
Yeah, that sounds about right. I would have them maybe as a final wild card spot again. But yeah, the 8, 9, 10 spots or slots there, I would see them there. I think a lot depends on their forward depth. If they're able to get a lot more contribution outside of that McKinnon line, because I think with their back end will be one of the best young defense back in the. Wow, let me correct myself there. One of the best young defense in the league back there. That will be providing a lot of offense to those forwards, and it'll be up to those younger forwards to put that puck in the net. Well, if they are able to, I can see them.
Oh, Matt's frozen. Hopefully we get here. Oh, right. There. Are you back?
Yeah. I can see them being in that wild card spot.
Yeah, I see potentially with the young defense. Think about it. In the next couple of years, you're going to have Girard, Barry, Makar, and Timmins as probably your top 4. That's a pretty solid defense. I really like a lot of the moves Joe Sakic's made there. He was forced to trade away Matt Duchene and got an absolute treasure full of items back for him. And they're definitely going in the right direction. So that's our episode for today. We want to thank you guys for listening to B&B Hockey Talk. Smash that like button. Hit the share button. Tell your friends about us. Let's build this up. everything about hockey. That's what we talk about. As we get through these 31 teams, tell us what you want to hear. Maybe leave a comment for us. If you hit the share button, we're going to give you a shout out in our broadcast. Thanks again for joining. I'm Aaron Bloxel with my co-host, Mr. Matthew Balzer, and we will see you guys all tomorrow. Thanks again.